And as they say about history, those who do not learn from it are doomed to repeat it. And actually,
Five, four, three, two, one.
The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets.
hello and welcome back to season 2 of the Grand Failure Beyond the Streets podcast. I'm your host, Rebekah Massie. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome aboard. I'm truly glad that you're here along with us for the ride. Since we're kicking off a new season today, I do need to take a moment for a completely shameless plug. If you haven't already listened to season 1, I highly encourage you to check it out. And whether you decide to finish this episode first or pause and go back, just know that I genuinely appreciate you choosing to spend your time with me, my cheesy sound effects, my dry humor, and this little podcast right here of mine. Now, I'll be honest, when I first started this podcast, I was convinced I'd stay completely on track with my original vision and not get distracted at all. Looking back, that was probably a bit naive. But hey, hindsight's 2020, right? When I first jumped into this, I really had no clue what I was doing, and I'm not kidding. I didn't know how to write an episode, I didn't know how to produce it, I didn't know how to distribute it. I wasn't even sure if I'd commit to the bit, as it were, and actually make it through an entire season, much less make it past a couple of episodes. And I definitely didn't know if anybody would actually listen. Fast forward to now, and I can confidently say I still know basically nothing about podcasting, which brings me to the episode title for today, and that is Back in the Saddle, because honestly, I just need to jump back in and do something. Doesn't matter what, but I do feel compelled to put myself out there again. And if nothing else, I just need to get a few things off my chest. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. The past several months have been incredibly tough, and that's putting it mildly. They've been some of the hardest months of my life, if I'm being completely real with you. But I'm here, and though I may be a little bit bruised, I'm still standing. My feet might be tired, my back probably aches, and some days I just feel like I need to stop and rest. Maybe even hibernate a little bit. But I'm here. I'm still standing. And even if I don't fully understand why or how just yet, I know one thing: I have to keep going. Moving forward means picking up some of the broken pieces along the way. And it won't be easy, but I will do what I must. And what I must now do is stand up, get back in the saddle, and do it better than I ever have before. Before diving deeper into today's topic, I want to take a moment and reflect on the past year. Though the grand failure and the ideas behind it began roughly 18 months ago, that means that with the formation of its legal corporate entity, yes, if you didn't know, the Grand Failure is a 501c4 corporation filed in Arizona last March, granted tax exemption in September by the IRS, which means that this month officially marks 1 year of its formal existence. And while it feels a bit strange to celebrate 12 months of something that hasn't quite produced the results I initially envisioned, I can honestly say that the journey in and of itself has been an experience. That journey, however, like I alluded to before, has been nothing quite like what I expected, or even honestly, what my wildest imagination or fever dreams could have even come up with. If you had told me a year ago what the last roughly 6 months of my life would look like, I wouldn't have believed you. And that was even before what I should start probably calling or referring to in true Lemony Snicket fashion, my own series of unfortunate events, if you will. But here's what I've realized in all of this self reflection I've been stuck in. To truly understand where I am, what I'm doing, and what my purpose is, I need to look back. I need to reflect on where I've been and how life's events have shaped me into this version of myself. And while I call it a new version, I know deep down that that's not entirely true. This version of me has probably been here all along. Right now, though, I'm only just beginning to accept it, and I really only feel like I'm just scratching the surface. So, fully embracing it, that's still something that I'm working on. And if I'm being honest, I really don't think that I'm there quite yet. But for now, I'm acknowledging it, and that's enough. But enough with the philosophy lesson. Let's get into today's topic. At its core, this is about resilience. It's not about how hard life knocks you down, it's about how you get back up again. Notice how I said how and not if. Because if there's one thing about me, it's that I don't easily take no for an answer, especially not when it comes for standing up for myself, my children, or my family. Now, let me be clear, I'm not talking about threats or coercion or forcing anyone to do anything against their will. That's not who I am. It's not really something that I believe in. And I know firsthand that this world can be a very hard place. But I strive to be a mostly peaceful person And with being a mostly peaceful person, my philosophy is simple: live and let live. That is, as long as no one is posing a threat to life, limb, or property. If you've listened to season one, know me personally, or even just maybe read a little bit about me, you probably know that I'm a libertarian. And if you are at all familiar with libertarianism and what it entails, you might also know about the NAP, also known as the non aggression principle. For those who don't, let me explain it in a way that I've always explained it to my kids. It's simple, it's effective, and if I do say so myself, it's actually pretty unforgettable. Now, because I firmly believe that all exchanges should be voluntary, I'm giving you an out. If you'd rather not have this explanation seared or burned into your brain forever, now's your chance to bail. Not that I want you to, but now's your chance. You're still here. Okay. Well, don't say I didn't warn you. All right, here goes nothing. The easiest way to describe the non-aggression principle, or the NAP, is that it is basically the exact opposite of Cobra Kai. Yes, that Cobra Kai from the Karate Kid, or the Netflix series for those of you who are younger. And by the opposite, I mean this. Number one, you do not strike first. Number two, you may not always need to strike hard. Number three, sometimes you will need to strike hard. And number four, there will be moments where showing no mercy is entirely necessary. However, number five, as Mr. Miyagi wisely tells Daniel in the Karate Kid Part 2, karate is for defense only. And if you ever find yourself confused, refer back to rule number one, which is, for those of you who are paying attention, you do not strike first. So much like Mr. Miyagi's classic wax on, wax off lesson, choosing peace is truly about building muscle memory. It's a conscious choice, one that is not always easy, but to me, it's essential. I can be angry, I can be frustrated, but if my first instinct is to resort to violence, then I'm really no better than the two mainstream political philosophies that I so often criticize. Peace doesn't necessarily mean that you're passive. It's a discipline. And that discipline is what sets true strength apart. Now, despite my spotty attendance recently, I'm proud to say that I've decently managed to keep up with the local politics here in the city of Surprise. For example, I know that the Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG, had held a virtual meeting earlier this month, so earlier in March, regarding the Grand Avenue corridor of road, specifically between the Loop 303 and SR 74, aka Carefree Highway. I'm also aware that the city is in the process of going through its budgeting events, which are ultimately going to shape the surprise budget for fiscal year 2026. And interestingly enough, despite the city's insistence last summer that we just had to raise the sales tax rate to make up for a budgetary shortfall caused by the state legislature's decision to remove the rental tax, that the city of Surprise has once again decided to host a music festival this year. I recall that the city council discussed the festival last year, especially as sort of a post-mortem, if you will. And oddly enough, when they were discussing this same music festival last year, they noted that it didn't just cost the city money to put on, but noted that it didn't even break even, and even with ticket sales and other revenue falling short of covering the event's expenses, that we actually lost quite a significant amount of money. I know that we have a new vice mayor who was selected earlier this year, and I know that the BNSF Railplex project, or intermodal facility, I think is what it's technically called, was set to be voted on here in the month of March by the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. However, that is allegedly moving to the month of August now. And coincidentally enough, I know that at a recent city council meeting, there was a work session where the chief of police presented crime statistics. And then there was also an activity where the city council and the mayor had reviewed open meeting laws, particularly of note, some of the Arizona revised statutes that I mentioned on my podcast last year that govern public officials, more specifically those statutes around conflicts of interest and ethical behavior. In the midst of all of this, I know, of course, that there have been some quieter changes too. I know that Skip Hall finished his term without much fanfare or very many appearances since the events of late August. And then I also am aware that Allison Klein and Ken Remley have both finished out their terms, which took them through the end of 2024, just like Skip. I'm also aware that in mid-January, the city attorney, Robert Wingo, had submitted his resignation to city council. And he did so by also requesting to complete his contract, which ended on March 1st, and asked to work remotely for the duration of that time left in his contract. Now, what you may not know is that I did actually attend the city council meeting that I'm referencing here on January 14th, which is when Robert Wingo actually submitted his resignation to the council. And not only was I there in attendance, but I spoke during the public comment period on that agenda item. This was the first city council meeting that I had attended since the month of August. And to be honest, I was terrified, absolutely terrified. My hands were shaking, my voice quaked as I spoke, and I felt like an absolute nervous train wreck. But I pushed through it because I truly believed, and I still do, that being there was the right thing to do in that moment. It was a conscious choice to stand up, to speak out, and to show up. Before I get into the why I felt speaking out that night was the right thing to do, let me pause and play you the clip from the city council meeting on January 14th. And you'll notice, I'm sure, that I really was not kidding when I said I was terrified. I absolutely was. You can hear the fear in my voice. It's very shaky. You're going to notice a few breaks in tone as I struggle to get my words out, but I'm sharing it with you today because what I said then still rings true. And not only did it need to be said then on January 14th upon the resignation of our city attorney, but these words, I feel truthfully, are absolutely worth repeating. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council and City staff. Also, good evening, my fellow residents. It's been 147 days since I last stood at this podium and last stood in these chambers and addressed many of you from this podium right now. The last time I was in here, my 10-year-old daughter, at the time, she's since celebrated another birthday, but she was with me that night. And what should have been a happy occasion over the last few months has definitely been anything but. Despite the city attorney's resignation being the right course of action for myself, my daughter, and my family, it comes 147 days too late. It's too late because there's absolutely nothing that can be done to undo what happened that night. There's no reset button that you can press. There's no undo. And ultimately, there's no way to make me whole again. And there is no way for my daughter to unsee what she saw that night. I stand here today, once again, to voice my personal opinion about the city attorney, Robert Wingo, who I still believe has failed this city in his ability to provide counsel, or lack thereof. His tenure has been, in my view, a series of missteps and negligence, and the record reflects this. I could outline all of the specifics, including the many ways he's likely violated or voided his own contract, but since the contract's not attached to tonight's agenda, I can't verify that for certain. He's also, in my opinion, violated the Arizona Supreme Court's rules of professional conduct for lawyers. Let me be clear, this is about more than just poor job performance. This man sat in the same chambers and watched as I was forcibly removed, handcuffed, assaulted, and arrested and carried out of these chambers at the direction of Chief Benny Pena and our former mayor, Skip Hall. His inaction in that moment and ultimately his failure to uphold any semblance of justice and accountability speaks volumes. Robert Wingo should not only resign, but also forfeit any further compensation by the city. And in fact, I would even make the argument that he should pay his salary back to the city so that the taxpayers do not fit the burden of an unelected bureaucrat who we didn't vote for and has been essentially repeatedly failed us. I tried to warn you. I stood here 147 days ago and spoke out against giving this man a raise and imploring not only you as the council, but the residents to see the truth. I warned that he didn't deserve a raise, let alone continued employment, and I stand by those words still today. I'll leave you with one final thought this evening, and it's some wisdom from Dr. Ron Paul. And in his book, The Revolution, he states that truth is treason in the empire of lies, and those words have never been truer than they are still today. Thank you. Now, I returned to council that night because I had unfinished business. I still do. Given that litigation is ongoing and I've only ever returned to the council that one time since the night of August 20th, as I'm sure you can imagine, Legal cases complicate things even when they are absolutely necessary. So until my legal team gives me the green light, I won't be discussing the case much, if anything, about it here or elsewhere. If you were hoping for some inside scoop, I'm truthfully sorry. I am afraid I am going to have to disappoint you on that front. And the reason I'm keeping things locked up so tight is to protect the standing of my case. It's not because I don't want to share. I truly do. I would love nothing more than to pour my heart out to anyone willing to listen. But at the end of the day, my advocacy efforts are about more than just that one terrifying night in August. Despite feeling as though I'm at the bottom of the Grand Canyon trying to crawl my way out at times, I know that I have to fight that feeling and I know that I have to face myself in the mirror. And most importantly, I refuse to let that one single night, no matter how difficult it was, define who I am or who I'm becoming. It's not that I regret how I acted or that I would take back what I said. I wouldn't. In fact, I said as much in my return speech that I played for you a few moments ago. But moving forward means I have to look at myself in the mirror. Those events really did happen. Part of the work I need to do to move on involves reflecting on how I got here in the first place. Part of it involves assessing the issues at hand, and a part of it, a big part of it, is knowing when to pick my battles. Sometimes you need to know exactly which hills are worth dying on and which ones are better to tactically lose so that you can live on to fight another day. And hopefully, when this all shakes out, these choices will help me ultimately win the bigger war that I'm fighting, even if I don't realize it at the time that I'm doing it. Which brings me to my next point. Now, when I say winning the war, I'm not talking about political adversaries, I'm not talking about policy decisions, and I'm not talking about partisan battles. It's really much simpler than that, even though that's not what they want you to believe. Now, when I refer to they, I mean the formal they, as in the government as a whole. Yes, the entity of the government itself, the machine we're raging against, if you will. And maybe that might just be the anarchist wing of the Libertarian Party speaking through me, but hopefully you get the point. What most people fail to realize is that this war we're fighting isn't some us versus them situation. It's actually the state versus you. And by you, I mean all of us, or more simply put, the people. The sooner that we all grasp this truth, the sooner that we can stop spinning our wheels trying to fight a war on two separate fronts that we've been misled to believe is intertwined. Those two wars are not. Allow me to explain. See, I have a theory, and bear with me here. In fact, if you feel the need to shield yourself from this coming wave of brilliance, now is the time to grab your tinfoil hat for safety, of course. Joking aside, here's my theory, and that is simply everyone is a closet libertarian, they just don't know it yet. And what I mean is that essentially we all more or less want the same thing, and that is to live our lives the way that we want, free from external, read government, intervention. We don't like being told what we can or can't do. Free will exists for a reason. What matters is how we choose to exercise our free will. Deep down, we all want to live in a way that we feel is best for ourselves, our families, our friends, and loved ones. At its core, libertarianism is simply the belief that government has too much power. If you don't believe me, bear with me here for a second, but imagine your ideal society, a utopia, governed however you see fit. Now, think about all of that control you would potentially be willing to give up to make that vision, that utopian vision, a reality. Now, imagine with me the complete opposite, your worst dystopian nightmare. You see, the reason why I say that is you cannot have it both ways. If you give politicians the power to redistribute the things that you want in life, you are also granting them that same power to take them away from you in the future. You cannot control who holds that power, not directly anyway, and it is a dangerous gamble at times. If you're not worried about it, I hate to say it, but you need to open your eyes and start paying attention. Tyranny comes in many shapes and sizes. Are you prepared to recognize it when it's staring you in the face? Will you know how to challenge it in that moment? Now is the time to clarify your principles. It's the time to think critically, and it's also the time to reflect on one of my favorite quotes from Henry David Thoreau from his essay Civil Disobedience. And that quote is simply this: that government is best which governs least. As any good libertarian will tell you, it is essential that you take everything that you hear with a healthy dose of skepticism, no matter the source. And I know for a fact right now, some of you are completely on board with what I just said a few moments ago, but I also know that some of you weren't quite ready to hear those words, and maybe you never will be. But Your kids are going to love them, and that's perfectly okay. I'm not here to force you to believe me. So instead, I'm just going to quote Thoreau again. After his famous words about government being best when it governs least, Thoreau made another insightful comment about government efficiency. For those of you who may not be up to speed on the latest headlines, and yes, I do mean Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short, I'm not criticizing the idea of cutting waste. I'm all for it. I thrive on it. Hell, I do it professionally as an IT related project manager. It's in my nature to find better ways to get things done and do it faster. But unfortunately, Thoreau was right when he said government is at its best, but an expedient. Most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. Let me repeat that for emphasis. Government is at its best, but an expedient. But most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. Before I share my thoughts, really take a moment to just digest those words, let them sink in, marinate on them, and then ask yourself, what was Thoreau really trying to say here? What is the deeper meaning behind this? Don't worry, I'll wait here until you're ready to move on. All right, you didn't think I was just going to leave it there with a Thoreau quote, did you? Don't worry. Couldn't do that to you, but before I close out the first episode of season 2 of the Grand Failure podcast and send you off into the world, possibly with a brand new perspective, allow me to share with you a few final thoughts today. First and foremost, I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the rantings of yet another angry libertarian, and I say that with all sincerity. I know you have options, and I know us libertarians, of course, love our podcasts. We can sound angry about everything all of the time. For those of you who haven't heard this more reflective and philosophical side of me, you might be thinking, is this really the same woman who wore a Cyberbully the Government t-shirt and went a bit viral last fall? And I can confidently answer that question with a yes, that was and still is me. But what you may not have realized, and this goes back to my earlier reference about a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, is that much like Mr. Snicket, much of what you saw in the public eye, or while I was at a council meeting, was a mask, or if you will, a cover. Work for those of you who are familiar with pro wrestling terminology. For those of you who don't get the reference, a gentleman by the name of Daniel Handler used the pseudonym Lemony Snicket. So what I was putting out when I was publicly speaking about issues throughout the Surprise Arizona community, at city council meetings, when being interviewed by journalists last year, etc., really that was a hyperbolically exaggerated version of myself. It was my own pseudonym, if you will. I never intended to come off as an attention-seeking individual, and I was wholly unprepared for people to recognize me or even know my name. But sometimes, and anybody who's tried any form of grassroots activism or anything along those lines knows this probably better than anybody else on the planet, there are times where perfectly reasonable people are going to find themselves in a situation where the only choice is to do some things that might seem a little bit unreasonable. Let me go ahead and fill the blanks in here. So I started out actually as one of the more reasonable but very outspoken voices to city officials, specifically talking about the roads and the traffic near Grand Avenue and Loop 303 in District 1, so up in northwestern Surprise. I wasn't always the loudest, nor was I always the most passionate. In fact, I spoke one-on-one with many city officials about how I would much rather work with them than oppose them. Back then, maybe I was a bit naive, thinking surely not all government officials are bad. And while that sometimes is true or somewhat true, as Thoreau pointed out, most governments are ineffective, inefficient, and sometimes all governments are. Yes, I mean it. Every single one of them. You see, I told people that I spoke to about the traffic and the safety issues in the northwestern part of our city that I'd much rather be a helpful ally than a powerful adversary. And I meant that with all sincerity. I wanted to be pragmatic, working with people I agreed with rather than opposing decisions I disagreed with, which is to say that I was always willing to be reasonable. That is, until I felt that there was no other choice but to appear unreasonable. And ironically enough, one city employee that I told this to joked a little bit and said that I sounded like Batman when I said this because I wasn't necessarily the hero that we needed, but the hero that we deserved in that moment in time. And that conversation has gone on to stick with me. And that conversation has gone on to stick with me. Not because I think of myself as Batman or even a vigilante at all, because as another DC comic book character would say, you have failed this city. And by you, I mean the city government, the city employees, the elected officials, and really the system as a whole. I mean it. The system's failed us. Would I like for it to work? Sure. Do I have any faith that it can? That honestly remains to be seen. And that is because the system was designed to fail. And it's working precisely as it was designed. For you IT folks out there, especially my developer friends, it's not a bug. It's a feature. Now, as I wrap up, I want to leave you with the entirety of the quote that I've been referencing in the latter part of this episode, which is the opening paragraph from Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. If you've never read it, I do highly recommend that you do. It's a timeless piece of writing despite being penned all the way back in the year 1849. And here it is. I heartily accept the motto that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically carried out. It finally amounts to this, which I also believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is the only mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, or in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. Now, for those of you who don't understand the historical context, Thoreau wrote this essay in response to the Mexican-American War. For those who are unfamiliar, let me give you a quick rundown of some history. And that is to say that a war broke out between the United States and Mexico because of the actions of then President James K. Polk, who sent a man by the name of John Slidell on a secret mission to Mexico City. And the purpose of sending Mr. Slidell to Mexico City was to try and negotiate the disputed border between the US and Mexico. Slidell's presence on foreign soil was essentially seen as hostile by the Mexican government, which then prompted them to send troops over to confront them, which then led to Congress to go and declare war. Thoreau, who was an abolitionist, protested this war essentially by refusing to pay his taxes, which ultimately landed him in jail. And his essay was a direct response to the war and his imprisonment over taxes by critiquing the government's role in starting it. That conflict would lead to the censure of President Polk, the reopening of the slavery extension debate as more states tried to move into statehood, and then eventually ultimately contribute to the secession of the southern states and ultimately help in starting the American Civil War. If you still think the system isn't broken, think again. And as they say about history, those who do not learn from it are doomed to repeat it. And actually, the full quote from George Santayana's The Life of Reason, published in 1905, is far more ominous, in my opinion. And that is to say that the whole quote in its entirety is simply this: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And with that, this is Rebekah Massie signing off. Until next time.
You're listening to The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets, a podcast that dives deep into our community, illuminating the pressing local issues that shape our lives, the political landscape that influences us, and the impacts of government bureaucracy, not only in Surprise, Arizona, but throughout communities across the country.
Grand Failure podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Rebekah Massie. Jonathan Perry is credited with the voiceover and announcement work. A special thank you to Spotify for podcasters, our hosting distribution platform, and to the folks over at Audacity for their open source software that made the production and editing of this podcast possible. All graphics, logos, and artwork used to promote or identify the podcast were created by Rebekah Massie using the Canvas software. Sound effects and music were provided courtesy of freesound.org, a website offering royalty-free Community Commons licenses for a variety of sound bites, songs, and effects. Any sources, news articles, or additional information can be found on the dedicated website for the Grand Failure podcast at thegrandfailure.org. I'd also like to give a shout out to my fellow residents of Surprise, Arizona, especially the group of individuals who help form the local political action committee Voice of Surprise for their ongoing commitment to making their voices heard in our community. And I want to formally acknowledge and express my sincere gratitude to my husband, Brian Massie, for his unwavering support. He has been my anchor, keeping me grounded through all my endeavors. Both he and my children are the true motivation behind everything that I do. Thank you all for your time, and remember that all the podcast credits, details, and information can be found on thegrandfailure.org. That's thegrandfailure.org.